Also, I think the purpose of these lectures and talks, not rather lectures, but more talks and discussions, try and achieve or showcase how professionals in industry actually approach design and design resolutions and design developments. What are the informants that go with it? What are the important design decisions that are made across the whole spectrum of such a development, or any challenge for that matter, not necessarily always architectural. So I think it's a question of understanding what methods and approaches people use, and then also for the students to engage with those methodologies and approaches which might assist them with their own work. So I think that is an important part of this. It's also, secondly, an introduction to people these students might eventually work for. Also people that they start getting introduced to officers and architects and professionals, which in all cases are aspirational or inspirational in a sense. And I really think that the 14 or 15 that we've selected, and there are many more that I can refer to, but they are something that I would like everyone to aspire to. The other segment of the lecture series is to have a discourse around education or higher education and what the role of architecture and planning and design has when it comes to designing for university campuses, academic buildings, and that forms also part and parcel of your project in studio. That's now the honors program. Okay, so I think that's just as an introduction. Also, as a first candidate and victim of this lecture series, I would like to introduce, I'm glad to introduce Jessica Thompson. She is an ex-Vitsi herself, qualified under correction about 4 or 5 years ago, and has been working at LHA Architects for the last 3 or 4 years, overseeing a variety of projects. And I'm happy to hand over to her, and we'll trust that afterwards we can have a bit of a discussion around what she's presented, and also field some question. Over to you, Jess.
Hi.
Okay. You know, imagine, and introduce yourself a bit more than I did.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, just give me a moment so I can share the screen. Let's see. Can you see it, Ludwig?
Yes, we can see. Well, I can. I'm sure everyone else can as well.
Okay, great. So yes, hi everyone. And Ludwig, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this lecture series. I'm honored to be included in, let me just sort this out, sorry. I'm honored to be included in such an experienced and diverse panel of speakers, and I look forward to following all the lectures in the remainder of the semester. So as Ludwig mentioned, a bit about myself, I am a former Vitsi. I'm currently working with LHAUD. I've been part of the team for the last 5 years, where I've been fortunate enough to be exposed to multi-scale projects that range from both urban design frameworks right down to architecture. Today, however, I'm going to talk about a project that I've been involved with for about 2 years at the office, and it was the design and the implementation of a student residence and dining hall for the University of Mpumalanga at the Mbombela campus in Nelspruit. It required the design of a 200-bed student res and a 700-seater dining hall at the university. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the University of Mpumalanga is one of two new universities that were opened in South Africa in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, and the only two provinces that did not yet have a university of its own. So the other university is Saul Plaatje University in Kimberley in the Northern Cape, and the main campus for University of Mpumalanga is the Mbombela campus in Nelspruit. So what you see in front of you is the Urban Design Framework Plan. Ludwig Hansen Architects and Urban Designers was appointed, amongst other things, to design the spatial framework with various implementation strategies to get these universities off the ground. The main campus is made up of a lower campus, a south campus, the hill campus, and an orchard campus. The first phase of development for the university focused on the lower campus, which has, over a very small span of 6 years, seen the first phase of the university to transform what was once the former Lowveld School of Agriculture into a university campus, which provides tuition and living arrangements for more than 2,000 students and is still growing. So the site that was earmarked for the development of the student res and dining hall is located on the southern edge of the lower campus. There it's highlighted, west of the main university entrance, and is one of the last buildings to see the construction of the lower campus. So conventionally, when you design a building, you receive a brief and a site, and these comes with a set of constraints. And for me, what has made this project quite special was the opportunity to design a building into a spatial development framework, which came with its own constraints and guidelines that it provided for us to, as a departure point to design the building. The spatial development framework doesn't only provide a vision plan for the implementation, but it sets multiple guidelines for the architect and consultants team to design to. And this ultimately results in a campus that has spatial cohesion and a good sense of place and identity. The framework considers how the buildings contribute to the quality of the open space through various considerations such as the building heights, the building material, where active edges and landmarks take place, vistas and access, and so forth. This all contributes, as I've said, to a campus where, although each of the buildings are designed by a different architect, they all work together in creating one campus. The spatial development framework furthermore considers scale, so where it works from the macro vision plan, which is the larger vision that spans over a much longer period of time, down to the meso, which considers the relationship that each proposed building will have with the greater campus and the open space in between. It also considers the micro considerations, the material palette and the type of brick to be used, and even the mortar joints that this brick needs to be bedded in. So I was really excited about being able to design a building into a framework like that. The spatial development framework ultimately set the scene for us to consider what the purpose is of this building beyond the functional requirements of the brief as a student residence and a dining hall. If you think of a university campus as a small functioning city in its own right, every type of building has its part to play. The student res and the dining hall fulfills a vital part of this city-like structure. It becomes a home away from home for students embarking on their studies for a number of years. It is the space where living, informal learning, and socializing will take place outside of the formal academic program. This human element of the building was a really exciting prospect for me, and we worked with it a lot in developing the building. So this understanding of the social obligations of the type of building that had to be made ultimately became one of the key influences for the design of the student res and dining hall. We set out to design a building that was focused around creating as much communal and social space that could enhance the campus life as possible, which sounds like quite a public building. But if you think about it, your bedroom, your bathroom, and your eating arrangements are some of the most private spaces and intimate spaces you occupy. So essentially, we set out to design a building that is made up of mostly private program with an intent to foster the best possible public space. This, from the onset of the project, raised an awareness around the importance of thresholds and the gradation of access from public to private. So looking again at the site, just practically, there were several challenges and considerations around the site. It was a vacant site, but the first was the elongated shape of the land parcel being just over 150 meters long, which is quite a long piece of land. Secondly, the fall of the land, which ran perpendicular to the length of the site. And there was a number of beautiful and well-established protected tree species on site that we had to retain. And this significantly reduced the development footprints on site and how we could lay out the building. The site was very much exposed and has a strong visual presence along the D725, which is this road curling on the southern edge of the site, and the N4 further south, as well as a 40-meter road reserve, which delineated the limitations of construction of the building. So these were all the almost givens when we arrived with the site and the brief. As I've mentioned before, it's located west of the main university entrance, which sits on the east, with the Vice-Chancellor's offices just across the road from that. So it's quite a prominent building on the university facade. And on the northern edge was a main internal campus road that connects the lower campus to the Hill campus on the west, and across from the road of a very already established university residence designed by Cohen and Garson architects. So essentially, the building would not be afforded a backside. Here you can see the aerial view of the site while it was used as a contractor's yard, and you can take note of the entrance to the campus, the VC's office. The topography already becomes quite clear, and the established trees on site you can take notes of, which is something wonderful and quite unique about the campus in Nelspruit, is it has a very lush and green natural environment. So speaking to one of the thinking behind the lecture series, just to speak a bit about the design methodology, we decided to treat the site as a mass from which we would carve out a building. The solid would contain the functional program, and the void would eventually contain the social program. First, we responded to the urban access lines as guided by the urban design framework. And then we split the elongated mass of the site into smaller, more manageable blocks for development. We then functionally had to reduce these massing blocks into more slender perimeter floor plates that can accommodate the functional planning of a student res and a room arrangement, as well as providing adequate sunlight to all the rooms. By doing this, we created several courtyard voids that varied all in intimacy and scale. So at this point already, we've taken what is a very simple building mass and we've used it as a threshold to the larger campus where open space becomes more contained. The perimeter blocks overlook the courtyards and the campus streets, and this improves the visibility and security of these open spaces that we created. So to the one side of the building lies an object-like mass, and this facilitated the most public program of the developments, the student dining hall. And on the opposite side of this main urban or campus access, we placed the student residence. The separation of the two programs was intentionally done, and the connection of all these spaces was done with a visual axis that links the building from east to west. So there's the dining hall, and this would be the student res component. In response to the vehicular movement that we saw earlier on the D725 road, the dining hall envelope responded with a singular gesture to create a building landmark. It's almost the first impression from a distance for vehicles approaching the campus. And thankfully, the inherent nature of the dining hall could accommodate single strong gestures. It had more freedom, unlike the rigor that you require functionally from that of a student res. So this is just at the onset of the project what we started imagining the space to be able to look like. And then on the inside northern internal edge of the campus, the building envelope responds more so to the pedestrian scale. It was intended to greet students and pedestrians on the ground level, while landmark features and corners respond to guidelines from the spatial development framework. Again, just starting to visualize what we had in mind at the onset of the project. Referring back again to the topography of the site and most of the sites on this campus, both the northern and the southern mass of the building was designed to be porous on the ground plane. The intention of that was to create a heightened pedestrian experience and create a raised awareness of the fall of the site. So it is a distinct feature of the hill topography of UMP, and instead of obstructing that and blocking it off, we wanted to really emphasize it. Similarly, the mass, as you can see, of the dining hall was designed to have a transparency as well, from the internal street edge of the campus straight through the building to a framed view box to the view of Nelspruit. So moving from massing to planning, the intention of the ground floor plan was to, as far as possible, locate all programs of shared or public nature on the ground floor plan, and in such a way that it would bleed easily into the new courtyard spaces that we were proposing and the larger campus landscape. So this would include like formal study spaces, as you can see on the northern edge, communal laundry rooms, and student lounges and breakout areas, and to really create a almost unobstructed flow from internal space to external space, from public to semi-public to private. And that was the intention from the onset of the project in terms of planning. The building elevation had to respond to the functional requirements of the student bedrooms, which created a lot of vertical articulation of the facade, which was intended to break what was essentially almost what I said collectively 150 meter long elevation with the student res. The depth of the facade, as well as the material difference, attempted to manage the scale of the building in the greater campus landscape. And the existing Marula tree that we had to retain actually became a celebrated landscape element that was cradled by the building and provided a softening element to the elevation and to the rigor that comes with planning a student res with the repetitive windows and the functional requirements of the space. So it also provided somewhat of like a natural curtain to the rooms that surround the courtyard. Throughout the design process, we had to test the massing in relation to the campus fabric to see that it sits comfortably and it actually fits in. So looking at the final ground floor plan of the building, from the sketch plan to what was actually built, there are 3 main courts within the design with varying levels of access. The first court is the dining hall, which is accessible to all students on campus. It doesn't only serve the students of this student res, but as it has a capacity of 700 plus, it serves the broader campus. And this is followed by a large courtyard which separates the campus public from students in the residence by means of a curved landscape wall and a change in level. I'll speak a bit more to that later, but this really becomes the forecourt to either entering the dining hall or the student residence. This is where, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Just so then a question about this. So is this then the entrance to the campus as well? No, it's just the entrance into the building, not the campus.
It's just the entrance into the building precinct. So once you're in the campus, it's a good question. Students are encouraged to move freely throughout the campus, and it's then up to the buildings and the schemes themselves to filter students from public to private and to allow them in and out where they are allowed to be. So the dining hall should be used by students on a daily basis and should then therefore be very accessible and quite public. And I say public in inverted commas because it's not truly public, it's public to the life of the campus. So once you are on campus, this is how you would enter. And yeah, so the second courtyard becomes the forecourt to the main entrance of the student res. And this courtyard space is divided by means of a curved landscape wall, which separates the public space to the semi-private courtyard, which is only accessible by students in the res. All communal services are located around this courtyard. We've got provision for a bookshop, laundry rooms and drying rooms. We've got seminar rooms that look out visually into the space. And on the southern edge, we've got all the student games rooms, TV rooms, and lounges also spilling out onto this courtyard space to really make it an active edge and an active open space. So when you move through the foyer of the residence, you come through into the Marula Courtyard, which is a soft courtyard and the most private court of the building, which is reserved for students who reside in the residence. The Marula Courtyard is surrounded by a series of universal access rooms for students with physical impairments or disabilities, a large study space, and access to the warden's apartment who oversees and looks after the students in the res. So the arrangement of the open space can be seen almost as one extended threshold that gradually filters the students from public to private. So here you can start seeing the transparency of the facade through the dining hall. And here you locate yourself on the main access or entry point, as I've just shown, to the precinct. Take note of a really fun portion of working with the building envelope and designing the smaller detail of it was to consider how the building edges can make a more comfortable environment for students to linger and meet. Elements such as built-in benches, landscape benches, shelter from the harsh sun, which is a big thing in Nelspruit, and rain, as well as drinking fountains, are all placed in these areas to encourage students to gather outside and linger together. Here is the main entrance to the dining hall. And if you look at the dining hall in section, we stood outside looking into the building. The dining hall was designed as a 2-story building with a large industrial grade kitchen on the lower ground level, which can accommodate 700 students in a single seating. It was also designed in a way that when it's not being used as a dining hall, it could be used as a lecture venue or any other institutional event that needs to happen. In this specific section, you can see how the building has been designed to remain open along a north-south axis to the view from the internal campus street. And you also get an idea, because of the deep floor plates, we had to introduce a skylight that could bring in soft dappled light into the dining area. So some of the photos are still construction photos, some of them are more final photos, but they get the idea across. Here you can see once you enter into the dining hall, how you still get a strong sense of the access line that moves east-west. It terminates with an outside eating area that has a growing wall with a screen for planting to take on, as well as a skylight that filters the light quite softly into the space. On the north-south axis, the building's quite transparent, so you also, again, get a good appreciation and connectivity with the Nelspruit landscape and the campus landscape. The outside eating area with the screening device, where we've included planting to grow up, because there was a small window in the afternoon where the afternoon sun would really pull in deeply into the building. So as this grows over, the space will become softer and you would feel more outside than as is now. This is looking back towards the student res. And as you make your way down the stairs, you really can start feeling the generous interior of the dining hall. So it's quite large in its scale. The timber ceiling that you see on both ground floor and lower ground floor lends a warmth to the material palette, which could be quite hard otherwise. And it softens the interior space functionally as well to assist with sound absorption. So here you can see the lower ground floor plan, making your way down the stairs with an array of different seating opportunities. You've got bench type seating, you've got outside seating, you've got group seating with a generous serving area. And I think what I'd like to point out to the students is the size of an industrial grade kitchen to serve this space is approximately, it ranges between 30 and 40% of the total floor area of the building. So it's a heavily serviced kitchen that needs to contain free refrigeration rooms, freezer rooms, fresh storage rooms, a service yard to access, weigh and clean all that material, and all of that needs to flow seamlessly through a kitchen that can then prepare and serve the students on the lower ground floor level. So looking out from the serving area out to where the students would sit down below. And just to get an idea of how heavily serviced the back of house functioning is of a building of this nature, there's a lot of planning that goes into designing a kitchen that can cater for a single seating of 600 to 700 students at a time. Here you can see what the serving areas look like. And then looking at the external elevation of the building, the western elevation in the dining hall as a whole has much more of a sculptural envelope, and the western edge specifically has a sculptural edge which really brings to front the beauty that shadows and lines can create with the brickwork. So it really gives you an opportunity to start playing with brickwork and walls and curvatures in such a way that you can appreciate the time of day and the vivid light that is inherent to the Nelspruit landscape. So when you move back up to the main courtyard space from the lower ground level, you start to get more of a feel of the building material palette. The building material palettes for this building and all of the other buildings on campus are guided by a standard campus specification, which is set forward by the SDF. And in this image, you can see the fire escape staircases we wrapped in a concrete breeze block with various opening sizes. So it becomes the way that we assign the materials to the building also becomes almost like a manageability map to the building. And it introduces a slightly more playful element to have you through these picture boxes almost. So as you move down the axis, you move into the second courtyard. The second courtyard is the largest courtyard that you need to actually walk through to get to the main entrance of the residence building. So this was consciously done to improve the active nature of the space. And here you can see how we've used the landscape as a structuring device to create a threshold that's a bit more subtle and gentle than just a wall or a palisade fence or a building, in that fact, to separate students who reside in the res with students who are outside the res. So you can see the open nature of the ground floor plane in the main courtyard. Instead of using a solid high wall to separate the public space from the semi-private space, the change in landscape helped us in this way. It provided an opportunity to create a less imposing boundary. The idea here is to create a courtyard that is an active open space where students from other residences and the broader campus can meet with students from this residence outside the confines of the rooms or the process of having to check in and sign in, and really just becomes a spontaneous place where you can still meet and talk across a very open boundary. The wall itself is quite low, especially from the approach of the building. And again, looking at how every element of this large structure has been designed to accommodate students or people at a pedestrian scale, the way that the wall turns into seating and it curves gently to soften the edge of the kind of large scale residence facade behind. So this is looking back and really getting a feel of the scale of the courtyard and how it's contained by the residences on either side, with the dining hall in the distance. So the spaces that open up onto this courtyard contain the social program for the residents. As I spoke earlier, you've got games rooms that open up onto this. You've got more enclosed TV lounges. So while this is all in a shared open space, we used elements such as joinery to almost create a space within a space that just, again, filters from public to private. To what is more quiet sitting rooms where you can meet with family or talk to friends, and all these spaces spill out onto the lower courtyard plane, which has a lawned area for students to sit and read a book. And then this is again looking back at the higher area where you've got bookshops and laundry areas on the more public area of this courtyard. This is what it looks like from below. So if you look, we've currently just been in this space, and if you look at the building along an east-west section, you get a much better idea of how the various open spaces are linked together through a visual open axis. Open space 1 being the dining hall, open space 2 being a combination of public and semi-private courtyard, and open space 3, which we'll get through now. Open space 3 is the most private of the 3 courtyards. And in order to get there, you have to move into the foyer of the student residence building. The face brick material is carried through to the interior here into the foyer. You can decide whether you want to move up to your room, whether you want to go to the study space, which is located behind us, and seminar rooms, to the right, down the ramp to the lower ground, communal shared social spaces, or if you move through the courtyard, you move into the most private of the courts, which is the Marula Courtyard. The Marula Courtyard is slightly more intimate in its scale, and the landscaping was designed to be a softer space where you can get away and have a moment to yourself. The beauty of this courtyard is really that it's ever changing with the seasons. So the view from your room and the quality of light will change throughout the year. And while this courtyard sits right at the edge of the university entrance, the presence of the tree provides a sense of calm that you need to take some time off as a student. Small gestures such as raised beds around the landscaping to provide students a place to sit. Again, it's all part of how the building meets the landscape to create a more comfortable pedestrian experience. So moving back to the inside of the building, we've now worked through the 3 main courts which the building has been structured around. You move into the main entrance of the building where you can go up to the rooms, and we are in the central lobby for the student residence. Inside the student lobby, we've created a triple volume skylight with a patterned face brick wall that goes all the way to the top. It's almost like a brick tapestry. And after the wall, this wall was built, it's quite high. It was quite a feat. The contractor jokingly noted that this is an ideal area where students will test out their rock climbing skills. So we wait to see, but it can become an arena of sorts. Again, the opportunity of the face brick palette, which was a given to us, to animate flat wall surfaces and really like announce light, the time of day, and texture adds to the more playful elements of the building. So here we look at the first floor plan where you get a better idea of the student residence itself, so and how it's been made up. So the residence itself is a mixed res, so it's men and women mixed together in one building, but they have to be divided, made up of a series of single rooms, double rooms, self-catering apartments for like postgraduate students, high-performing students, or even visiting students and scholars, and universal access rooms, which were located on the ground floor plan. All of the rooms, except for the self-catering rooms, make use of shared ablutions and small kitchenette facilities. So working out the ratio to accommodate students, it's almost approximately a 1:4 ratio for ablutions, and looking at creating almost wings that can accommodate students in their various houses, with the self-catering apartments placed consciously in the center as a filtering element. So the main service there of the building, as you come up, you would decide whether you go to what has become the male wing of the building or one of the female wings, which was a 60-40 ratio roughly. And all these self-catering apartments would be seen to go to more senior students. Each one of the wings is a level of security or a threshold that you pass through, and mostly you enter through a small kitchenette, which will then take you to your bedroom, whether you are in a single or a double room, with the ablutions further along. So the small shared kitchenette facilities was designed to provide each student with a lockable cupboard for non-perishable items, as well as a small cooking area for cooking very small and simple meals, making a cup of tea, along with other standard kitchen appliances. The idea behind these spaces was really not for students to prepare full meals in the kitchens, but rather to function as like a tea kitchen between studying or taking a break of sorts. The bedrooms themselves all come furnished. What was interesting about designing a student residence building is the fact that all joinery, all cupboard handles, everything has to be designed for students in mind. So the door handles were designed so students can lock their cupboards and lock away their valuables. The room locks were spec'd to a standard that a student can lock with a padlock, and you can still access the room if you need to get into it. And then what you see in these rooms is at the onset of the project, we made a decision to, in an attempt to reduce the construction coordination time in casting the services, to provide the bedrooms with these pelmet-like structures. And the pelmet essentially would contain everything a student needs to function in their bedroom. So it would contain the lights, it would have a dropper with a study light in it, it has your plug points, your network cables, and everything you need to operate your computer from your bedroom. And each student then has a dedicated pelmet. The pelmet's also designed in such a way that you can clip on things to it, you can clip on photos to it. So an alternate approach to casting services in the soffits into the slabs, we decided to go for a joinery item that combines essentially the lights, the curtains, and the electrical fixtures to the rooms. As I mentioned before, all the bedrooms have vastly different views, and that was quite a rewarding outcome of the design process. So they either look into the different courtyards, they look into the internal campus streets, or they overlook the views to Nelspruit. Some of the rooms are fortunate enough in terms of the design that we follow to include a small balcony as well. So they have all been designed to not be too monotonous and too repetitive. And then as you move up to the third floor of the building, you find the top wing, which you'll see in the photographs was slightly higher than the remaining buildings on campus. So we decided to treat this wing with a cladding. So we used the clip lock sheeting cladding to break the scale in the elevation line. You'll see that here, so that the building itself doesn't become too high relative to the buildings on campus. The third floor really does step in certain ways to accommodate this clip lock roof sheeting. So when we look at how the building responds to the internal campus street edge, I spoke briefly about the softening of the Marula Courtyard and almost the porous threshold that gets created by taking on the concrete grill blocks. The ground floor level has a covered pedestrian walkway for students. So as they move along the campus, they are sheltered against the sun or rain. And again, the way that the building and the landscaping becomes a threshold between the larger campus environment and the building itself always has a consideration for the finer details, creating moments where there could always be a bench or a point to stop, providing adequate lighting so students feel safe at night and day. Speaking personally, I believe the building has been designed in harmony with the spatial development framework. The open spaces have been carved out and have been designed with a matched rigor as the program of the building inside. through working with the various materials, we attempted to deal with the boundaries and the thresholds between public and private in a more gentle way that is more conducive to people enjoying the social spaces around the building. And ultimately trying to create a building that really responds well to the urban environment, or shall I rather say the larger campus environment, so that students don't feel like the only space they can socialize or enjoy is limited to a classroom or bedroom, but really that the external space around is matched. So the building was completed, I think, July last year. Here you can start seeing a bit of the detail of the clip block roof sheeting that breaks the scale in the facade, the brick patterning that comes together with the verticality of the student windows. The design considered even the shape and the size of the window to promote optimum airflow within a single room by creating 2 opening sections, and to enhance the vertical nature of the facade where you look at the build-up of the window, the depth of the sill, and the match in between. You can get an idea of the south elevation and the difference in scale between the dining hall, the strong urban access line that breaks through, as well as the student res. There you have a view of the dining hall as it is completed, with the picture box window looking over Nelspruit. And again, the detail of the brickwork that really has the potential to animate what could be otherwise a flat facade. So yes, that's it from my side.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. I think that's fantastic. Well done. And I think that was a very comprehensive analysis of a building and its process. And I would endeavor the students to understand methodology and approach from that perspective as well, at least looking at buildings. I'm going to open up the floor for some queries or questions. So by way of raising your hand, I suppose I can see people and then you guys can respond. Enrico.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the clip block cladding. It was quite a dark finish. Did that have any impact on the internal climate due to the biome of Mpumalanga being quite a semi-arid area?
If you're referring to the color of the clip block sheeting,
yes.
The color we spec'd is dark dolphin. It's a campus-wide spec that we applied. And interestingly enough, there is a pigment built into that shade of clip block, which actually serves almost the same as a white sheeting, that it, for not knowing fully the scientific understanding behind it, but it is built into the pigment of the sheet color that it actually reflects the heat instead of absorbing it as you would expect with a dark roof sheeting. In saying that, the darkness of the sheeting climatically didn't have much of an effect on the internal quality of the building. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool.
Aidan?
Hello. I just want to ask, you were talking about the trees and how you had to conserve them. How did you know to conserve those specific trees? Because for our project, I'm doing that, but need to maybe find a site or something that I can see which are heritage trees and which trees are significant.
Thanks, Aidan. I think that's a very interesting question. One of the fortunate things with working on a big project like this is the big project team that we get to work with. So on board our consultant team, we had a landscape architect who would go on site and do initial analysis of the site and identify sensitive biomes and trees that either have to be retained or replaced if you have to remove the trees. So with guidance from the landscape architect, we knew which trees had to be retained and then which trees we could remove, but we had to replace. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
Okay.
Just also on that, there's an overall environmental assessment which would be done for the whole campus, which identifies specific plant species and the like. Also, water courses, sensitive plants, grasslands, all of those things are identified and redlined to a certain degree. And there is a huge focus on ensuring whatever you take out, maybe they might not be endangered species, but if you take one out, you need to replace it by 15 others, or newly plant others. So there are quite strict regulations around this, and so there is an environmental officer also that oversees all the projects and ensuring that there's no spillage, and making sure there's no spillage of, say, diesels or petrol. All of those kinds of things are looked at quite carefully. So, yeah, so it's part of the bigger process.
Where can I find this information? Oh, I think you muted.
No, it's because probably I don't know your answer to give you a so straight answer quick. I'll share you probably some websites and some information that you can have a look at in terms of those procedures. But yes, fair comment. We'll do that.
Thank you so much.
When it comes to your site specifically, we're doing something in Braamfontein at the moment. There is a environmental assessment of that campus, and I think I can share that with you as well. At least gives you an idea as to what are the principles we look at. Anyone else? Queries? Sure. Nothing.
I've raised my hand, but I don't know why.
Oh, I don't see it. Sorry. Oh, there, Yolani. Sorry, I didn't see that. Please go.
Okay, so besides the normal project team that you've already mentioned that you've worked with, and engineers and quantity surveyors and all those people, what were the other interesting or people that you may not have thought you would have worked with on this project, or professionals?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the specialist consultants, which again furnished services, as Ludwig mentioned, to the larger campus and not just this building specifically, but I haven't worked with the consultants, is an environmental and sustainability consultant. And this consultant was brought on board right at the beginning of the establishment of the university, and also provided input on the urban design framework. So they provided guidelines as to how thick the wall should be to deal with the inherent climate of Nelspruit, what the roof should be doing, what the overhang should be doing, to really help us design the buildings from the onset in the most sustainable way, almost with passive responses. Second to that, I think working with the specific building at hand, we worked closely with a chef and kitchen designer to help us understand the process flows and how an industrial grade kitchen would operate, because there were lots of considerations that I would have never known had we not been involved with them in terms of how a kitchen functions of that nature, what is the process, what is the protocols. So those were the two unique consultants that I haven't engaged with on the project. But overall, I think because of the sheer scale of the building, every consultant really has its time for tremendous input into the project.
Okay,
yes,
thank
I
you.
mean, I can just, I'll get to Katie in a moment, but I do think the coordination of some of these heavily serviced environments, the residence is really designed as a passive environment. So, you know, you try to normal airflows and those things are quite easy to resolve. But when it comes to something like an industrial science kitchen for 700 students in any given sitting, the coordination of those services become really complicated. And you'll probably do also with Rion's input, you'll come across this whole idea of always underestimating the sheer size of extraction fans, the amount of wastage that comes out of these, how much material has to come, not material in this case, food has to be transported in, stored, processed. And I think, that is a science in its own right, just to get that going so that it doesn't impact on your overall design concepts and your design intentions, because so easily what happens is that you then compromise and it sort of bleeds into the nice open spaces that you've created. So I think that's a complexity that I think is quite useful in this program. Katie?
Hi there. Can you go through a general time frame and schedule for a project like this in different stages, how long everything took?
Okay, so I think Ludwig would also be able to provide insights on this, but the project itself starts much longer before you actually break ground on site. So we spent about a 4 to 6 month period from receiving the brief, liaising with the client and the end user, developing and finalizing the design, as well as coordinating it with other consultants. And this project specifically was fast-tracked along with other projects to be completed quite fast. So that resulted in a very interesting construction methodology from the contractor. We were on site for approximately 2 years from when we broke ground to when the building was finished and handed over. And because the building was divided into these big different blocks and the tight timeline that was involved, there was actually a strategy involved around how can we do a partial handover of the building. Is because the dining hall and the residence was 2 separate buildings, was it possible to construct the one and finish the other? And even within the residence itself, we eventually ended up doing a phased handover approach of the building. So some of the blocks were completed while some of the blocks weren't completed. And to delineate a clear timeline in terms of we spent this much time on finishes or this much time on substructure and superstructure would be difficult because of the scale of the building. By the time you break ground on the one end of the building, you're already doing brickwork on the other side of the building. And so it almost like staggers throughout the project. But overall, it was about a 2-year process. Don't underestimate the time it takes to finish a building once the roof is on and snag it so that all finishes are completed. That took about 5 months, 4 to 5 months finishing and snagging. But if everything was done like together, all the concrete work was done together, all the brickwork was done together, it would be easier to delineate the contractor's program. But it was a staggered program so that they could shift the construction teams to work more efficiently on site.
All right, thank you.
Who's next? Ariella?
Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much. That was very inspiring and helpful. I was just wondering 2 things. The first thing is the budget of the project. Was that, how did that work? And were you able to stick to it? And also, I guess, how was it easy to manage doing, I'm not sure where your offices are based, but going back and forth to Mpumalanga, how did that work? And did that inhibit the process at all?
So 2 really interesting questions. I think not being too much into the cost myself, I can just say that when in the beginning of the project, when I described some of the challenges around the site not being a flat and straightforward site, all those inherent site challenges contribute to a cost that is not expected in almost the perfect project fee. So those elements contributed to the project cost, but also to add to that, the designing with a university and within a government framework, the fees that you're allowed to spend are highly regulated. So the building actually goes through a cost efficiency exercise, which you calculate by looking at the assignable space in the building versus the non-assignable space, which would be your double volumes and triple volume spaces and all your circulation spaces. And you have to aim for a benchmark of a 75% efficiency ratio in order for the building to, I would say at a high level, be deemed to be on target in terms of cost. This building, because of the challenges around the trees and the site and the long nature of the site, I think shot in at about a 73% average ratio. So it was, I would suppose, over budget, but a lot of it had to do with constraints on the site beyond our control. So not on account of any major mistakes or errors. And then the second question regarding moving to and from the site. I mean, as a young architect in an office, it's very exciting for me to move to site. It is time consuming, and I think for the contractor, more often than not, it was not always convenient not having a site architect on board. So our site visits happened on a bi-weekly and in certain stages of the project on a weekly basis. We would stay in Nelspruit for 2 to 3 days at a time to meet with the consultants, with the contractor and the building team, and work through all the queries at hand. So for me, it was exciting to travel. I was fortunate enough to be part of a team with a very experienced site architect, which guided me a lot on site with the contractors and the consultants. It is possible. It is definitely an exciting thing to travel to site. For me, it was. But it's something to consider on a project.
Thanks.
Okay. Maybe just on the cost issues. Costs are, as Jess has said, are highly regulated. There are very specific cost norms when it comes to buildings for the higher education sector. And these cost norms have ratios and values attached to them. And these ratios depend on the functionality of the building. So if you give a standard function like an office, would be a ratio of 1. That would be the norm, but then you would have other spaces which are far more involved. Let's take a laboratory as an example, or a raked lecture venue, and they would have a ratio of 1.5, 1.7, etc., etc. So that's how. So there's quite a science behind how educational buildings are valued, and you try to get into those, make sure that your building fits into that value. In this case, very difficult to do because of the site constraints that go with it. Other cost issues which come into play, especially at university buildings these days, are twofold. One is student unhappiness, resulting in buildings projects stopped, riots, etc. At the same time, the construction industry has the same problems. So we have either students rioting and or construction workers also creating disputes. So those are sort of aspects that we can't control sometimes and cost the projects quite a substantial amount of money over and above. Katie, your hand's still up? Is it?
It's not meant to be, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I think that was a very constructive hour of work and description. And I think over the next 14 lectures, I think we're going to have quite a comprehensive understanding of education facilities and buildings. This not is academic, but it is part and parcel of the university operation. So I think, Jess, thank you very much for your time and effort, which you've obviously spent. I think it was well received, and I think a very good introduction to the series. Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Just as an organizational thing, whilst I've got everyone, I'm requesting my group A to meet from 12 o'clock onwards, if that's okay, just because I've got a school session from 2 until 3:30. So please, just that as a matter of organizing. Then also, then on Thursday, 10 o'clock, there's also a lecture. That is around CAD design or designing with CAD. So I would appreciate your attendance to that. I think that is always very useful to speak to that. And I think that sort of is the end of my input. If there's any critical questions, then please raise them now. If there's not, I'll see you guys at 12. That's Group A, and the rest I think will start. I think mostly at 1-ish. Thank you very much, everyone.